The vacation was supposed to be a time to reconnect, a much-needed escape from the mundane grind of our daily lives. It had been my idea, a week by the beach with our two kids, morning walks on the sand, and lazy afternoons by the pool. Yet, as soon as we arrived, I could sense something was off. Mark, my husband of 13 years, seemed restless. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work. He'd had a tough few months, and I knew he struggled to fully unplug. But his behavior didn't match the usual signs of work-related anxiety. No, this was different. He wasn't irritable or distant. Instead, he was overly attentive to his phone, his eyes darting to the screen every few minutes, as if it held some life-or-death secret. It started subtly enough, checking his messages during our family dinner the first night. "Just making sure everything's okay at the office," he explained with an apologetic smile. I brushed it off, though it irked me. We were on vacation, after all. I couldn't wait a few days. But then it escalated. He began sneaking glances at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I caught him slipping out onto the balcony late at night, the glow of his screen illuminating his face in the darkness. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was overthinking things. But by the third day, the tension was eating away at me. I couldn't stop noticing the small changes in his behavior. He seemed distracted, his laughter forced. When I asked him if everything was okay, he brushed me off with vague reassurances that only made my stomach twist tighter. The breaking point came on the fourth morning. I woke early, hoping to take a quiet walk along the beach before the kids woke up. Mark was still asleep, his phone on the nightstand beside him. I reached for it without even thinking, my fingers trembling slightly as I unlocked the screen. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, snooping through his phone, but an invisible force pulled me toward it. The first thing I noticed was the text conversation. Her name was Melanie, a woman I didn't recognize. The messages were casual at first glance, but a deeper read sent my heart plummeting. "Can't wait to finally meet," one message said, followed by a heart emoji. Another read, "Let me know when you can slip away." My hands shook as I scrolled further. They had been talking for weeks, maybe months. She lived in this very town, the same beachside paradise we had chosen for our vacation. I felt like I couldn't breathe, my chest tightening with a suffocating mix of rage and heartbreak. I confronted him later that morning when the kids were down at the pool. I could barely hold myself together, the words spilling out of me in a broken whisper. "Who is she, Mark? Melanie? And don't you dare lie to me." His face went pale, his expression cycling between shock and guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. That silence was all the confirmation I needed. Tears blurred my vision as I fought the urge to scream. Eventually, he mumbled some excuse. A work friend, someone he barely knew, nothing serious. But I had read the messages. I knew he was lying. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than anything I had ever felt. This wasn't some faceless stranger or a fleeting lapse in judgment. This was planned, deliberate. He had chosen this woman, chosen to risk everything we had built, all for the thrill of some secret rendezvous. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions for the sake of the kids, but inside, I was crumbling. I couldn't look at him without feeling a wave of disgust and sadness crash over me. He avoided me, spending most of the day on his own, claiming he needed to clear his head. That night, after the kids were asleep, I confronted him again. This time, I demanded the truth. The floodgates opened, and he admitted to meeting Melanie online a few months ago. "It was harmless at first," he said, his voice trembling. "Just chatting. I never thought it would go this far." But it did. I shot back, my voice cold. "You were going to meet her, Mark, on our family vacation." He had no defense. The guilt on his face was answer enough. For hours, we argued. I asked him why, demanded to know what I had done to push him away. But his answers were shallow, evasive. He didn't know why. He claimed he loved me, that he hadn't meant for any of this to happen. The words felt hollow, meaningless. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as tears silently streamed down my face. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Could I forgive him? Could our marriage survive this? The foundation of trust we had built over the years felt shattered beyond repair. The next morning, I packed my bags. I told him I needed space, time to think. He begged me to stay, to let him make it right. But I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't sure if I ever could. As I drove away with the kids, leaving Mark alone in that hotel room, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief, anger, and the faintest glimmer of relief. For the first time in days, I wasn't questioning my sanity or wondering if I was imagining things. The truth was out, ugly and raw, and I had a choice to make. What happens next, I don't know. But one thing is certain: nothing will ever be the same. Driving back home, my thoughts were in chaos. The kids were in the back seat, chatting about the vacation as if nothing had happened, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their parents' marriage. I envied their innocence, their ability to see the world without the weight of betrayal hanging over them. As I gripped the steering wheel, my mind replayed the events of the past few days, each memory hitting me like a wave. I couldn't stop asking myself the same questions over and over. How long had Mark been drifting away from me? Had there been others before Melanie? Was this just the first time he got caught, or was it a one-time lapse in judgment? Part of me didn't want to know the answers, but the other part, the part that demanded justice, needed them desperately. When we got home, I sent the kids to their rooms and collapsed on the couch. The silence of the house was deafening. I stared at my phone, debating whether to call my sister. Laura had always been my confidant, the one person I could rely on to give me advice without sugarcoating the truth. But I hesitated. Telling her would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened Mark's messages again. I had taken screenshots of the most incriminating ones before leaving the hotel, knowing I might need them as evidence. I reread every line, trying to piece together the timeline. Their conversations had started innocently enough: comments on photos, jokes, casual banter. But then the tone shifted. The messages grew more personal, more intimate. She had sent him selfies, some of them flirtatious, others downright suggestive. And Mark had responded in kind, his words filled with a giddy excitement I hadn't seen from him in years. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He had been giving her the attention and affection that used to be mine. The next few days were a blur. Mark called and texted constantly, begging me to come home, to talk things through. I ignored most of his messages, responding only when necessary to coordinate logistics for the kids. I told him I needed time to process everything, but in reality, I was avoiding him because I didn't trust myself not to explode if we were face to face. I started confiding in Laura, after all. Her reaction was exactly what I expected: fury on my behalf, mixed with a fierce determination to help me figure out my next steps. "You can't let him off the hook for this," she said during one of our late-night phone calls. "He needs to understand how badly he screwed up, and you need to decide if you can even forgive him." Forgiveness. The word felt like a foreign concept. How could I forgive someone who had shattered the foundation of our marriage? And even if I could, would I ever trust him again? Mark eventually wore me down. After a week of living apart, I agreed to meet him for coffee. It was a neutral setting, far from the home we had shared and the memories that now felt tainted. He looked terrible, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity for him. But then I remembered why we were here, and the pity evaporated. "I'm so sorry," he began, his voice trembling. "I don't even know where to start." I sat across from him, arms crossed, my expression stone cold. "Start with the truth," I said. "Why did you do it?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted. "It was stupid. I guess I felt invisible. Like you didn't see me anymore." "Are you kidding me?" I snapped, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I didn't see you? Mark, I've been holding this family together while you've been glued to your phone, chasing after some woman you met online. How is that my fault?" "I'm not blaming you," he said quickly. "I'm just trying to explain. I've been feeling lost, like I'm stuck in this rut. And Melanie, she made me feel alive." The words cut deeper than I expected. Alive. Was I so boring, so predictable, that he had to seek excitement elsewhere? My mind raced with every time I had tried to spark something between us, a romantic dinner, a spontaneous weekend getaway, only to be met with indifference. "You could have talked to me," I said quietly. "We could have worked on it together. But instead, you chose her." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice breaking. "A huge, unforgivable mistake. But I love you, and I love our family. Please, give me a chance to make this right." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that this was just a momentary lapse, a mistake he genuinely regretted. But the images of their messages were burned into my brain. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about love. It was about him getting caught and scrambling to save face. We left the cafe, without reaching a resolution. Mark promised to give me space, but his words lingered in my mind, pulling me in opposite directions. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, for the life we had built together. But another part, the part that was tired of being taken for granted, wondered if it was time to walk away. As the days turned into weeks, I threw myself into my work and the kids, trying to create some sense of normalcy. Mark and I communicated only when necessary, our conversations tense and formal. He swore he had cut all ties with Melanie, even showing me the message he sent her to end things. But I couldn't bring myself to believe him completely. I started seeing a therapist, hoping to untangle the mess of emotions swirling inside me. She helped me see that Mark's actions weren't about me. They were about his own insecurities and flaws. That knowledge gave me some comfort, but it didn't make the pain go away. Eventually, I agreed to couples therapy. It was awkward and painful, forcing us to confront truths we had been avoiding for years. Mark admitted that he had been feeling disconnected long before Melanie came into the picture, but he didn't know how to express it. I admitted that I had been so focused on the kids and the day-to-day grind that I hadn't noticed his growing dissatisfaction. We started rebuilding, brick by painful brick. It wasn't easy, and some days I wondered if it was worth it. But as time went on, I began to see glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. He was trying, really trying, to earn back my trust. And slowly I let him. But the scars remained. Every time his phone buzzed, I felt a pang of anxiety. Every time he came home late, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one I wasn't sure I would ever truly complete. To this day, I don't know if we'll make it. Some wounds run too deep to heal completely. But for now, we're trying. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The weeks turned into months, and our lives found a strange rhythm again, though it was far from the seamless harmony we once had. Each day felt like a balancing act, carefully measured conversations, cautious steps around raw, emotional landmines. The kids, perceptive in their own way, seemed to sense the shift. They asked fewer questions about why Daddy had stayed behind for a few days after vacation, but their innocent eyes still studied us when we shared the same room, searching for cracks in the facade. Mark was making an effort, that much was clear. He took on more responsibilities at home, helping with the kids' homework, planning family outings, even surprising me with small gestures like coffee in the morning or a favorite meal after a long day. But I couldn't tell if his actions came from genuine remorse or a desperate attempt to hold on to the life he was about to lose. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild itself easily. It wasn't just Mark who had changed. I had, too. I found myself second-guessing everything, his words, his gestures, even his love. The woman I used to be, confident and secure in my role as his wife and partner, felt like a distant memory. Instead, I had become someone I didn't recognize, guarded, skeptical, always waiting for the next betrayal. Therapy helped in small ways. Our couple sessions forced us to confront the wounds we'd inflicted on each other long before Melanie entered the picture. Mark admitted to feeling overlooked, like a piece of furniture in the house, useful, reliable, but invisible. I countered that his emotional withdrawal had left me carrying the weight of our marriage alone, a burden I hadn't realized was slowly breaking me. We aired grievances we hadn't spoken in years, some small and petty, others deep and cutting. The process was messy and exhausting, but it felt necessary, like lancing a wound to let the infection drain. But even as we worked through the issues that had festered between us, the specter of Melanie loomed. I couldn't escape her shadow. I became obsessed with her, scrolling through her social media late at night, searching for clues about what had drawn Mark to her. She was pretty, yes, but not in a way that felt unattainable. Her posts were polished, curated, pictures of her at trendy restaurants, smiling with friends, lounging on a beach not unlike the one where my marriage had unraveled. She seemed carefree, unburdened by the responsibilities that defined my life. Was that what he wanted? A fantasy unencumbered by reality? One night, I found myself spiraling down that rabbit hole again, staring at a picture she had posted months ago, a candid shot of her laughing at some party. My chest tightened with anger and despair. Did she know what she had done? Did she care? Mark had assured me it was over, that he hadn't seen or spoken to her since the day I confronted him. But the doubts crept in anyway. What if she reached out again? What if he couldn't resist? I didn't realize Mark was standing behind me until I heard his voice. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" he asked softly. I jumped, slamming the laptop shut as if I'd been caught committing a crime. "I'm not." I began, but the words died in my throat. He knew. Of course he knew. Mark sighed and sat down beside me. "She doesn't matter," he said, his tone pleading. "She never did. I was stupid, blind, selfish, whatever you want to call it. But it wasn't about her. It was about me being too much of a coward to deal with my own problems." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that she was just a symptom, not the disease itself. But the image of her laughing face lingered in my mind, taunting me. "You didn't treat her like she didn't matter," I said bitterly. "You treated her like she was everything." He didn't have an answer to that. Instead, he reached for my hand, hesitating as if waiting for permission. When I didn't pull away, he took it in his. "I know I can't erase what I did," he said, his voice breaking. "But I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you're the only one who matters to me. If you'll let me." I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of deception. For the first time in months, I saw something that looked like the man I had married, the man who had once been my best friend, my partner, my everything. But could I ever feel that way about him again? The days that followed were tentative. I set boundaries, made it clear that rebuilding trust would take time he would need to earn with consistent actions, not empty promises. He agreed, never pushing, never demanding more than I was ready to give. Slowly, painfully, I allowed myself to open up to him again, inch by inch. We started spending more time together, just the two of us. Date nights became a regular occurrence, though they felt awkward at first, like we were strangers relearning how to talk to each other. But as the weeks passed, those moments began to feel less forced. We laughed more, shared more. The walls between us started to come down. Still, there were setbacks. One night, his phone buzzed during dinner, and I couldn't stop myself from snapping. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice sharp. He looked at me with a mixture of sadness and understanding before showing me the screen, a harmless message from a coworker. I felt a wave of shame but couldn't bring myself to apologize. The wounds were still too fresh. The turning point came one evening, when Mark planned a surprise for me. He recreated the night of our first date, dinner at the same restaurant, followed by a walk through the park where we had shared our first kiss. It was cheesy and sentimental, but it worked. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, a small voice in the back of my mind whispering that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But the journey was far from over. Trust is a fragile thing, easily broken and painstakingly rebuilt. And even as we worked to repair our marriage, I knew there were no guarantees. Some days, I felt a sense of progress, of healing. Other days, the weight of what had happened threatened to pull me under. I don't know what the future holds for us. Maybe we'll make it, maybe we won't. But for now, we're trying. And sometimes that feels like enough. The years that followed were a marathon of rebuilding, an exhausting, slow trudge through the wreckage of what we once had. People always talk about forgiveness as if it's a single act, a decision you make once and then move on. But I learned that forgiveness is more like a habit, something you have to choose over and over again, day by day, moment by moment. And some days it felt impossible. Mark continued his efforts to prove himself, and I couldn't deny the consistency of his actions. He was present in ways he hadn't been before, emotionally, physically, and even in the little things I used to take for granted. He listened more, asked questions about my day, and showed up in ways that made me wonder if this version of Mark had been there all along, buried under layers of neglect and routine. But for every step forward, there were moments when the past reared its ugly head, pulling me back into the darkness of suspicion and doubt. A few times, I caught myself checking his phone when he left it unattended, scrolling through his messages and email like a detective searching for clues. Each time, I felt a mix of relief and shame. Relief that I found nothing incriminating, shame that I was still looking. The kids, thankfully, seemed blissfully unaware of the turmoil beneath the surface. They were growing so quickly, their laughter filling the house and reminding me that life, despite its pain, continued to move forward. They grounded me in ways Mark couldn't, their innocence and unconditional love a reminder of what was at stake. I didn't want to uproot their lives if I could help it, but I also didn't want to teach them that it was okay to accept less than they deserved. One night, nearly a year after the incident with Melanie, Mark and I sat on the couch together, sharing a bottle of wine. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt normal, comfortable, even. We talked about work, about the kids' school projects, about where we might take our next family trip. It felt easy, like old times, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself relax. Then Mark set his glass down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I need to ask you something," he said hesitantly. I stiffened, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "Do you think we're happy? I mean, really happy?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at him, trying to gauge where this was coming from. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Some days I think we're getting there. Other days, I'm not so sure." He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "I've been thinking about it a lot," he said. "About everything that happened and how we got here. I don't want to just survive this, you know? I want us to actually be happy. Together." There was something raw in his voice, something that made my chest tighten. I wanted to believe him, to believe that his intentions were as pure as they seemed. But a part of me still held back, afraid to fully trust again. "What does that look like to you?" I asked cautiously. "I think it means being honest with each other," he said. "Really honest, even when it's hard. And I think it means letting go of the past, not forgetting it, but not letting it define us either." I didn't respond right away. His words made sense, but they also felt like an oversimplification of a much larger problem. Letting go of the past was easier said than done, especially when the past had left such deep scars. Mark must have sensed my hesitation because he reached for my hand. "I know it's not that simple," he said quietly. "And I know I'm the one who put us here. But I want you to know that I'm all in, whatever it takes." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't the same man who had betrayed me a year ago. He was trying, fighting for us in a way I hadn't seen before. And despite everything, I still loved him. That love was complicated now, tangled up with pain and resentment, but it was still there, a small but stubborn flame that refused to go out. "I'm all in, too," I said finally. "But I need you to understand that this isn't going to be easy. There are still days when I don't know if I can do this." "I know," he said. "And I'll be here for you no matter what. Underscore, 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 underscore." The years passed, and little by little, the wounds began to heal. There were setbacks, of course, moments when the doubts crept back in, when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But there were also moments of joy, moments that reminded me why I had fought so hard to save our marriage. We renewed our vows on our 15th anniversary, a quiet ceremony, with just the two of us on the beach. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it felt right. Standing there with him, the waves crashing softly in the background, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the naive, head-over-heels love we'd shared when we first got married. It was something deeper, more complex, a love that had been tested and battered but had somehow survived. Looking back, I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive Mark for what he did. The betrayal left a mark on me, a part of myself that I don't think will ever fully go away. But I've learned to live with it, to let it shape me without letting it define me. Our marriage isn't perfect, and it never will be. But it's real. And for now, that's enough. As time stretched on, the sharp edges of the betrayal began to dull, though they never disappeared completely. Life carried us forward, school recitals, birthday parties, soccer games. The little moments filled our days, providing a rhythm that kept us moving even when the weight of the past threatened to pull us under. Mark's actions continued to back up his words. He wasn't just apologetic, he was present in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was in the way he'd ask me if I wanted tea before bed, how he'd sit through long PTA meetings without complaint, how he'd insist on planning date nights even if we were too tired to actually leave the house. These gestures, small and consistent, became the building blocks of a fragile trust. But I couldn't deny the part of me that still hesitated, that still clung to the memories of his betrayal like a shield. It was exhausting, living in the space between hope and fear. I wanted to move forward, to believe in the future we were building, but the past had a way of haunting me when I least expected it. One evening, about 2 years after our vacation, the vacation that had unraveled everything, I stumbled upon something that reopened old wounds. I was cleaning out the garage, sorting through boxes of old papers and photographs, when I found an old laptop that Mark hadn't used in years. I knew I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. I turned it on and started sifting through the files. Most of it was mundane, tax documents, photos from family vacations, work files. But then I found a folder buried deep in the hard drive, its name innocuous. Miscellaneous. Inside were screenshots of messages. Messages between Mark and Melanie. My heart raced as I scrolled through them, my hands shaking. These weren't the messages I had seen before. They were older, from the beginning of their conversations. Reading them was like being thrown back in time, back to the days when everything was falling apart, and I didn't even know it yet. The messages were flirtatious, but what struck me most was the ease in Mark's tone. He wasn't just responding to her advances. He was seeking her out, initiating conversations, asking about her day, sharing jokes and stories. It wasn't just infidelity. It was connection. A connection that, at the time, he hadn't been sharing with me. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there, my head spinning. The betrayal felt fresh again, like a reopened wound that had never fully healed. All the progress we'd made suddenly felt fragile, like it could crumble under the weight of this new discovery. When Mark came home that evening, I confronted him. The words spilled out of me in a rush, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. I found the messages, I said, holding up the laptop. All of them. His face fell, his eyes wide with shock and guilt. I thought I deleted those, he said softly, more to himself than to me. That's your response? I snapped, my voice rising. You're worried about deleting evidence instead of the fact that you lied to me. Again? I didn't lie, he said quickly. You already knew about the messages, about everything. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to hurt you again. You didn't want to hurt me? I laughed bitterly. Mark, every time you hid something, you hurt me more. Every time I find something you've kept from me, it's like I'm reliving it all over again. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I thought we were past this, I said, tears streaming down my face. I thought we were finally moving forward. But now, I don't know. Mark sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I don't know what to say, he admitted. I can't change what I did. All I can do is keep showing you that I'm not that person anymore. Then why does it still feel like you are? I whispered, my voice breaking. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, the air between us heavy with unspoken pain. That night, I slept in the guest room, the distance between us more than just physical. The days that followed were tense and uncertain. I threw myself into work, into the kids, into anything that could distract me from the gnawing ache in my chest. Mark gave me space, though I could see the anguish in his eyes every time we crossed paths. He tried to talk to me, to apologize, but I wasn't ready to hear it. It wasn't until a week later, during one of our therapy sessions, that I finally found the words I needed. "I'm not asking for you to be perfect," I said, my voice trembling. "I know you're human, and humans make mistakes. But I need to know that you're being honest with me. I can't keep finding out things you've hidden. It's breaking me, Mark." He nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was just protecting myself. I know I've hurt you, and I know I can't undo that. But I'm not giving up on us. I'll do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes." Hearing those words didn't fix everything, but it was a start. We spent the next few months rebuilding yet again. It was slow, painstaking work, and there were moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of it all felt too much to bear. But there were also moments of hope, moments when I saw glimpses of the love we'd shared before, of the life we were trying to rebuild. I don't know if our marriage will ever fully recover. Some scars run too deep, some wounds never fully heal. But what I do know is that we're still here, still trying. And for now, that has to be enough. The years continued to stretch out like an uncharted landscape, each one a mix of slow healing and small victories, setbacks and stubborn resilience. Life moved forward because it had to, and so did we, though not without moments where the weight of everything threatened to pull us back into the abyss. The messages I'd found on the laptop had been a breaking point, or at least it felt that way at the time. But looking back now, I see it as a turning point. It forced us to confront the lingering cracks in our foundation, the places where we had been patching instead of truly rebuilding. Mark did what he said he would do. He stayed. He showed up over and over again, even when I didn't make it easy. He let me cry, let me rage, let me accuse him when old insecurities bubbled to the surface. He didn't defend himself as much as he used to, and he didn't try to rush me toward forgiveness. Instead, he just listened. It wasn't a perfect process. There were still days when I questioned everything, when I wondered if I was a fool for trying to salvage something that had been so deeply damaged. But as the years passed, the sting of the betrayal began to fade. It never disappeared completely, but it softened, like an old scar that aches only in certain weather. One of the biggest challenges was reclaiming intimacy. For so long, the idea of being vulnerable with Mark felt impossible, like stepping into a room where the walls could collapse at any moment. It wasn't just physical intimacy that was difficult, it was emotional, too. Letting him back into the most fragile parts of my heart felt like risking everything all over again. But slowly, we found our way. It started with small gestures, holding hands on walks, lingering hugs in the kitchen, quiet conversations before bed. Over time, those moments grew into something more, something that felt like the beginnings of trust. The kids were growing up, and their lives became the center of our world. There were milestones to celebrate: graduations, first dates, college acceptances. Those moments brought us together in ways I hadn't expected. Seeing Mark with them, the way he encouraged and supported them, reminded me of the man I had fallen in love with. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but it was real. One evening, after our youngest had gone off to college, Mark and I sat on the porch together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years, the stillness both comforting and unnerving. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" he said, breaking the silence. "Just the two of us again." I nodded, sipping my wine. "It does. I'm not sure what to do with the quiet." He chuckled softly. "Me neither. But I think this is a chance for us to figure out who we are now, together." I looked at him, studying the lines on his face, the gray that had started to streak his hair. He wasn't the same man I had married all those years ago, and I wasn't the same woman. But maybe that was okay. Maybe we didn't need to go back to who we had been. Maybe we could find something new, something stronger. "I'd like that," I said finally, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Over the next few years, we settled into a new rhythm. We traveled more, taking trips that had been on our bucket list for decades but always seemed to get pushed aside for the demands of work and family. We spent weekends exploring hiking trails, visiting museums, trying new restaurants. Sometimes, we even stayed up late talking, sharing our dreams for the future in a way we hadn't done since we were newlyweds. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if we had truly healed or if we were just pretending. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. Slowly, the good days began to outweigh the bad. One day, while cleaning out the attic, I found an old photo album from our early years together. Flipping through the pages, I felt a rush of nostalgia and sadness for the people we had once been, so young, so full of hope, so certain of our future. Mark came up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "What are you looking at?" "Just some old memories," I said, holding up the album. He smiled, sitting beside me as we flipped through the pages together. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said quietly. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "We have, and I'm glad we did." That night, as we lay in bed, I realized something I hadn't been able to admit to myself before. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And so was our marriage. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is. But it was ours, and it was worth fighting for. The years turned into decades, and time softened the edges of everything. Our pain, our joy, even our love. What had once felt like insurmountable cracks in the foundation of our marriage became part of its story, woven into the fabric of who we were. Mark and I grew old together. We celebrated milestones that once felt impossibly far away, our children's weddings, the births of our grandchildren, anniversaries that marked not just the passing of time but the endurance of something that could have easily been lost. Each celebration was a reminder of what we had fought for, of the life we had managed to rebuild despite everything. In those later years, our relationship became simpler. The battles of our younger days faded into memory, replaced by quiet companionship and a deeper understanding of one another. We didn't always talk about what had happened, but it was there, unspoken yet acknowledged in the way we treated each other, with care, patience, and gratitude for a second chance. One evening, as we sat on the same porch where we had dreamed of starting over, Mark reached for my hand. His grip was weaker now, his skin weathered by time, but the warmth was the same as it had always been. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I never deserved the chance you gave me, but I'm so glad you did." I squeezed his hand, my heart full and heavy at the same time. "You earned it," I said, my voice steady with truth. "Every day since, you've earned it." The sun sank lower on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. The world felt still, peaceful, and I let myself bask in the quiet contentment of that moment. We had been through so much, more than I ever thought we could endure, but we had made it. And though the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined us. As the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, I leaned my head against Mark's shoulder, letting the weight of the years settle around us like a blanket. We weren't perfect, but we were here, together. And for the first time in a long, long time, that felt like enough. That night, as we lay side by side in bed, I closed my eyes and thought about the life we had built, the heartbreak, the healing, the love that had grown stronger than I ever thought it could. It wasn't the life I had imagined when we first said our vows, but it was ours. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Mark drifted off to sleep beside me, his breathing slow and steady. I listened to the rhythm, letting it lull me into my own dreams. And as I slipped into the quiet of the night, I realized something profound. Love isn't about never falling. It's about rising again, together. And we had.